But there's something I need to share with you is that the second I shook his hand, there was that joy. Wow, it's the great Madiba and what. But a penny dropped inside me, and I think this is a wonderful takeout from a chat like this, is that the second I shook his hand, I realized that my last 10 years journey from adolescent teenager, little squirt, to this young man had nothing to do with Mandela. It had everything to do with me and my journey. And I merely used Mandela as a catalyst, as a flag in the ground, a benchmark to say, right, no, I don't know what's going to happen, but that's going to happen to me. And I purposed myself. But the beauty about what 10 years journey to Mandela took, and subsequent 10 years until he died, I was with him 10 years, and my life now, is that it afforded me the opportunity to go out into South Africa and to discover for myself who and what we are and what we shape ourselves to be.
Hello everybody, on the show with me today I have documentary photographer Matthew Willman. And Matthew is an example of a man who had a purpose. After seeing Mandela for the first time at the opening of the ICC in 1995, he swore that he would one day shake the hand of his idol. 72 letters, 18 months on Robben Island, and 9 years later, he got more than a handshake. He became the official photographer for the Nelson Mandela Foundation. During those 10 years and in the years following, Matthew has photographed countless presidents, including the likes of President Barack Obama, President Bill Clinton, President Jimmy Carter, amongst many, many others. And in doing so, being a fly on the wall, being exposed to those circles of decision makers, Matthew has developed a very unique and holistic perspective on leadership, not only from a global context, but within a South African context too. I really hope that you enjoy this episode. I think it's a really important one with elections on the horizon and a stark reminder of what we fought for and what we continue to fight for in this country. In this episode, we do discuss 2 of the famous pictures that Matthew has taken of Mandela. And if you'd like to view those pictures, please view on Spotify or YouTube. And you can also go onto Matthew's website, thewillmancollection.com. That's the WILLMAN collection.com for purchasing of any one of these famous rare photos of Mandela. Please like, share, subscribe, and enjoy. Matthew Willman, welcome to the Expect Performance podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Wonderful. Matthew, I don't normally start this way, but I'm going to start this way with you. And it's going to be a message of thanks, because over the last week in preparation for our conversation that we're going to have, it's what the work that you've been able to do and how you've been able to document what you've done in your professional career has created an opportunity for me to take a step back into the history of our country and the significant people who've got us to where we are to today. So, and to some extent that wouldn't be possible without people like you who are documenting such people and documenting such work. So let me start by saying thank you for the wonderful work you've done and what you've chosen to do thus far.
I appreciate that. It's lovely to connect, and I'm always amazed that there are people who actually are interested to hear stories that I have to tell. So I'm looking forward to this next hour.
Yeah. So, Matthew, just for myself and for the listeners, you've had a wonderful career so far. Give me the context of your career. You tell me the story of why your career has become so significant and how you got to where you got to.
Sure. If I had to sell myself professionally, I'm a documentary photographer. I studied at Natal Tech and in advertising, and like every photographer in the 90s, South Africa was still emerging into the world and becoming a part of the world. I always thought I was going to be the next Annie Leibovitz, the next to go to New York City, be the next fashion and whatnot. So we were always trying to play catch up as photographers in South Africa. So after studying the 4 years at Natal Tech, I think God had another plan, and I went straight into documentary, and I've never looked back. So professionally, I worked in the field of archive and documentary photography for 27 years now. Feels like a lifetime. But contrary to popular belief, I'm not 21. I might look young, but yeah, I'm rocking on to 45 years old now. And I think what has happened over the last 26 years is I grew up in an era in South Africa where, coming into my teenage, adolescent years, I wasn't only just discovering myself, as all boys do. I was thrown into a cauldron of change. And that change was in 1994, the last pillars of apartheid fell. Change became an inevitable part of not only my life, but the lives of anyone who chose to be a part of the change or even lived in South Africa at the time. I mean, we know so many have immigrated, and, we have a diverse population that has changed, and basically the shackles had been fell off. And I chose, rather to run away, I chose to stay in this country. And I really would like to, honor my father, because I think I was 14 years old. I was seeing the change, and everyone was saying, right, immigrate. And he just said to me, he said, Matt, you've got two choices. If you can go, we can put you in any Commonwealth country, and you can start there. But I said, and what's the other choice? And he says, if you can also stay, but there comes a requirement if you want to stay, and that's you have to become part of the change. And I think that was something that sparked in me a desire, a wish, something that I could sink my claws into and give me purpose. I think one of the greatest things we rile against as human beings is apathy and indifference, not knowing what it is we're fighting for, what it is we're living for. And for me, being an idealistic creative, as an artist, as a lens-based artist, a photographer, I saw something I could actually become a part of. And as the old saying goes, so wrote the book. I just got out into this country. I knew nothing about my history. I knew nothing about what the 7 pillars of apartheid were: Group Areas Act, Immorality Act, Bantu Education. I knew nothing about that. I didn't even know people living down the road to me. And yet I had this desire to go out and meet what I call the human condition. I can say it succinctly now as an adult mid-career, but back then I couldn't put that into words. I could just say I had this passion. But what drove me more than anything was in 1995, Nelson Mandela opened the ICC in Durban at the Hilton ICC. And I remember standing in that crowd. I was a boarder at school and in my uniform on a Friday night. And I remember turning to my border master. We were right at the back of the 5,000 people there. And I said, that man on the podium, that one there, and it was Nelson Mandela. I said, I'm going to commit my life to shaking his hand. And wow. Little did I know that I was about to begin the rest of my life. And it really has. It took me 10 years to shake this man's hand. And we can talk more about that. But in a nutshell, my whole life and passion has been around how can I communicate change, development, advancement issues. Because, look, we know South Africans, there are many issues. But at the same time, erring to the positive, remaining positive in this generational change that we have gone through and are currently going through in our country. So, yeah.
Yeah. Matthew, if I can, so I'd read Long Walk to Freedom, and there was something in particular that struck me in the book when Mandela was talking about the garden that he tended to on Robben Island. And in many respects, he drew some metaphorical significance from it, but I think that in some respects it's reflective of that journey, that 10-year journey that you undertook from that boy at the ICC to then eventually shaking Madiba's hand. So if you'll allow me, I just want to take you through this. The quote goes, "A garden was one of few things in prison that one could control. To plant a seed, to watch it grow, to tend it and to harvest it, offering a simple but enduring satisfaction. In some ways, I saw the garden as a metaphor for certain aspects of my life. A leader must also tend his garden. He too plants seeds and then watches, cultivates, and harvests the results. I couldn't help but feel in that journey that you mentioned, that I hope you'll elaborate on shortly, it seemed like there, when you met him in the ICC, or you saw him in the ICC, that was the planting of the seed. Then that seed, that feeling started to grow. And then you started to tend to that feeling through action. And then finally, 10 years later, and then for some time after that, you then harvested and reaped the rewards of that dedication to ultimately achieving that goal. What was that 10-year or 9-year period like? How did you get to eventually that golden handshake, if you will?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I think, talking like this, we're able to get to the crux of what I call, again, this human condition. So one doesn't just start at 15 years old and suddenly decide, right, I'm going to meet Nelson Mandela. I lived in Pinetown. I was 600 kilometers away from him. For me, I always felt as change and the fall of apartheid and all that was happening somewhere else in South Africa. It wasn't happening in my little town. And when you have a goal and a dream, you know what? You come across many sort of problems. And one of the things that drove me was that I lost my mum when I was young teenager, and my father had to move overseas to work, as an expat, and I was dumped in a boarding school and told to swim. Now, that alone is a hell of a challenge, and I'm very happy to share it because I'm trying to get to a point of why I fought so hard to get to Mandela. You see, when I grew up, for the first 20 years of my life, I was a professionally trained ballet dancer. I've lived and worked in the creative world, and photography certainly is an aspect of that. So I knew what isolation meant. I knew what ridicule means. I knew what the fight means. I'd already had that sort of ingrained in me. So by the time I saw this man Mandela at the ICC, I had already equipped myself without even knowing that hardship was going to be a part of my life. And you know what? When you've got nothing to lose, you've got everything to gain. And I think this is one of the main reasons why I spend my life lecturing and talking and presenting to young adults and school kids about 15 to about 25 years old, is that you've got to turn those wounds into wisdom. You've really got to stop falling apart, but building what you have. And although Mandela was the goal, and it took me 10 years to get to him, not only did I shake his hand that one morning on the 13th of August, 2003, I became a commissioned photographer to the Mandela Foundation, and I was commissioned to build the Mandela Center of Memory visually through the archives. And I think that gave me, one, the journey to Mandela gave me purpose, okay? Two, it gave me direction. And whether I was 18, 19, 20, 21, 22 years old, I was resolute in that determination. And then after 9.5 years, I get to meet this man. You can imagine it was like meeting the Wizard of Oz. I was in his office, in his post-presidential office in Houghton in Johannesburg. He's got this beautiful foundation. And I remember reaching out my hand to shake his hand. And at the second of my greatest elation and greatest joy, I tripped up on myself because I didn't know what to call him. And I remember reaching out my hand and I went, "Good morning, Mr. Mandela, Madiba, sir. What do you call this man?" He had been so idealized in my mind that I had never actually brought myself to the point as, what will you say to him when you're there? But there's something I need to share with you, is that the second I shook his hand, there was that joy, wow, it's the great Madiba and what. But a penny dropped inside me, and I think this is a wonderful takeout from a chat like this, is that the second I shook his hand, I realized that my last 10 years journey from adolescent teenager, little squirt, to this young man had nothing to do with Mandela. It had everything to do with me and my journey. And I merely used Mandela as a catalyst, as a flag in the ground, a benchmark to say, right, no, I don't know what's going to happen, but that's going to happen to me. And I purposed myself. But the beauty about what 10 years journey to Mandela took, and subsequent 10 years until he died. I was with him 10 years. And my life now is that it afforded me the opportunity to go out into South Africa and to discover for myself who and what we are and what we shape ourselves to be. Now, I'm sitting here not saying it's easy and all I had to do was write letters. Clinton, I wrote 72 letters to Nelson Mandela over 9 years. I wrote countless letters to Archbishop Desmond Tutu, P.W. Botha, F.W. de Klerk, Ellen Suzman. It's not easy to get to these people. I came to a stage where I literally packed my bags in Pinetown, and my father said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to Cape Town." "Oh, great. What do you say?" I went and lived on Robben Island for 18 months. I came to a point in my life where I had to say, as an ignorant young white man in this country trying to adapt to change, I had to, first of all, I had to understand what struggle meant. And I had to understand who and how the hell do these men, these 9 Ravonius trialists, and even 3,500 other former political prisoners, how do they come out of prison preaching forgiveness? And I'll never forget, I was sitting with Bishop Tutu the one day, and I have done a lot of work with Tutu over the years. And I remember him saying to me, he said, the magnanimity of this man Mandela, because often I would have a conversation with him and I'll challenge the status quo around things, because remember, I'm the protagonist. I want to get answers. I need to believe in these people to keep my journey fresh and alive. And I'll never forget those words he said, the magnanimity of this man Mandela, this self-effacing character who literally crawled through 28 years of shit to come out the other side, maybe not squeaky clean, but determined to carry on his journey where he left off when he went into prison in 64. Okay. So that's how it became. And the years allowed me with Mandela to engage with a society, one I never knew existed, but to educate myself about the African National Congress, educate myself about the Inkatha Freedom Party, educate myself about communism in South Africa and the Congress movements and what does the Freedom Charter mean and what does nationalism mean and who were these characters in the Nationalist Party, and just to end off that question, I never stuck just with the liberators in my work. I went completely 180 degrees. I ended up living with P.W. Botha every year for 1 week, every year for 6 years. Because P.W. Botha, the former Prime Minister, State President, 1979 to 1988, there was a man that you couldn't read about in Google. I camped outside his house and eventually agreed to see me after 3 days. And I struck up it's a tough word to say friendship, but a relationship that allowed me to ask questions you can't Google. And that's, I think, what's fascinating about this journey I've been on. It's that there is a knowledge base that I came from nowhere, and I'm trying now to share it with as many people as possible.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Matthew. And the amounts of leaders that you've crossed paths with, I read somewhere over 22 presidents over the course of your career. I'm not sure if that number's grown
it's gone up a bit.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Has it gone up a bit? What are you on to now? How many?
I think it's 46.
Lost count.
46 or 48, I think. Anyway, I don't know.
Ex or current prime ministers, presidents, leaders of countries, eh?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I was
so that
leadership in any capacity.
Yeah. So that diversity of leadership and like you said, attending to people in that world. This is a difficult question to answer, so I understand that. But how has that exposure to those types of leaders changed your perspective on leadership and how you view the world?
Absolutely. But it's taken 26, 27 years to talk about it, because please understand, okay, here I was 23 years old, 24, and I'm walking in and I'm suddenly exposed to a world of Mandela and all these luminaries around you. I mean, you're a deer in a headlight. You are like a kid in a candy shop. You're like, I would literally be in Johannesburg that evening. I'd fly back to Durban And I would say to a friend at a coffee that night or the next morning, I'd say, no, I had a very strong conversation with the president of France. Or, I was saying it as if these people were my friends. And that was my first mistake. It took me a few years to appreciate that my role as a documenter, as a recorder, as an archivist, is to be that fly on the wall. I'm not friends with these leaders. And once I had matured, I think I was about 27, I began to realize that, no, I'm not their friend, for one. But more importantly, by being in their presence, I can sort of harvest who these people are and learn about leadership. And that's why your question is so apt. I am more times disillusioned by leadership than I am impressed by it. I found that in the years with Mandela, I actually became quite hard-ass with him in myself. I used to sometimes get so fed up with things. I used to sit in the corner of his office and I used to say, right, okay, Mandela, I'm going to sit and watch you now. Are you really what you say you are? And are you really what the world thinks you are? And I can say it openly now, and I'm not making a candid story here, but what I was doing was I was fighting things in my life that I required. I needed leadership. I needed to believe in certain ideals. And, I'm often asked, what was Mandela really like? I'm not Bill Clinton, I'm not Oprah, I'm not Her Majesty, former Majesty the Queen. But one thing I will share with you is that the man Mandela that we all saw on television, in the news, on radio, that personality, I can tell you now, he was exactly the same man in private. Now, I can't say that for many other leaders. I'm not going to name names, but you know what? I've had the privilege of being around leadership on many levels, whether they're philanthropists, CEO, business, presidents, whatever it is. It is very rare to find a character that exudes that same public persona and personality than when they're in private, because kind of all the bells and whistles come out. So I'm both disillusioned, but I've also been very impressed with certain individuals, individuals who maybe not become a president of a country, but individuals who have literally changed dynamics on thinking. I think of a man called John Pepper. I don't expect any of you to know him, but he was for 23 years, 23 years, he was the president of Procter & Gamble, the largest manufacturing product company in the world. And he became the chairman of Walt Disney. And he is a very good friend of mine. I think he's 86 now. But here is a man, unassuming. He flies economy class on international planes. He's a man so humble in his nature, but his leadership, he's written books. People fawn over this man, but his leadership is so inspiring. And he's the guy who brought products into East Berlin after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And he brought sort of American products, which is Coke and all the products, into former Russia, USSR. So, and his friends are people like Henry Kissinger. So although I never met Henry Kissinger, I knew him so well through my interaction with a man called John Pepper. So yes, leadership I've been both impressed with. And do I try and exude those same qualities? Well, look, I've met Mother Teresa as well, and I'm no Mother Teresa, and I don't ever have a hope to be. But I don't know. I like to feel that I've learned something from them, and those that get leadership right are those that are self-effacing. John Pepper, Nelson Mandela. Who else can I speak about? There's Kenneth Kaunda. Just salt of the earth people who have used their position not for personal gain, but have used their position sacrificially. And therein lies the story of Mandela. It's the sacrificial leadership. There's a 10-point program I lecture out to businesses, the 10 points of servant leadership, and on Mandela's servant leadership. And it's not me thumb-sucking sort of idealistic beliefs on the man, but it's how I've taken 10 key areas in his life where there's factual proof around Mandela's life and how he has harnessed this servant leadership. It's a fascinating story. But as I said, lovely question. Thank you.
Well, pleasure. Thanks for the compliment. To that point, I listened to another interview that you were on not so long ago, and one of the comments that you made to that host of that show really struck a chord with me. You said that Mandela had to liberate himself first before he could then act to be a vessel and a force for liberation for others. So I want to turn this around and then apply it to your journey and your career. What role did that man play in your liberation as an adult?
Yeah, excellent question. So, yes, I will say outright, yeah, he did help liberate my beliefs and my confidence. The thing about Mandela is, when you're around someone that exudes a certain personality, you pick up on that and there's a resonance. And I found that every time I was in that prison, we call it the Madiba magic, but it really was. It was this positivity, this sense of accomplishment. And for me, first and foremost, he brought me up as a young man into adulthood, and he kind of helped correct in me what a man can be and what he can achieve and what his principles are. Remember, Mandela was a deeply principled man. It was incredible. Some people see it as stubbornness. If just ask anyone who was negotiating with him during Cadessa 1 and 2 in the 92s and 93s in the early 90s. Did he single-handedly liberate me as a person? So no, I don't believe that. But did my journey liberate me? Absolutely. Because if I had just woken up, traveled to Johannesburg, shaken his hand, taken a few pictures, it would have just been another episodic moment in my life, like my 2.5 days I had with Barack Obama, or my 8 photo shoots I've done with Bill Clinton, or whatever. But because of the longevity of my time with Mandela, it was a slow release. I would go, I wouldn't see him every week. It would, some days I'd go 2-3 weeks without seeing him, and then the information would come back and I'd go and document, or an event would happen around Mandela. So I would go out back into the world. Remember, I'm a documentary photographer. So my clients are Oxfam, UNICEF, World Vision, World Health Organization, dealing with what, again, I use that word, the human condition, whether it's AIDS, malaria, tuberculosis, food security, water security, primary healthcare. So I was learning the cause of humanity through my camera, working with these aid agencies and understanding what struggle means, what previous oppressive regime or leadership can have an effect today on a post-apartheid South Africa. Remember, the lead-in and lead-out periods of any form of segregation or isolation or suppression doesn't just get lifted 1 or 2 years. It's a generational thing. And I've seen it in these rural communities. So, as I said in the beginning of this podcast, Mandela was the goal. And yeah, of course, I wanted to achieve that goal. But the 10 years getting to Mandela and the years subsequent to my meeting him and working with him, it has been this evolutionary change that has helped liberate my implicit bias. And I think, unfortunately, those who had privilege in the 40 or 50 odd years of, former nationalist government leadership, there was an implicit bias. And I feel that on both sides, there were opinions flying all the time. So one of my biggest journeys has been to let me, as a conduit, start using my career, my work as a photographer and a documenter, firsthand on all these issues, to challenge myself, to challenge my own implicit bias on what is racism, what is poverty, what is development, what is education, where are we being lied to? Because unfortunately, going back to your previous question about leadership, the greatest travesty I have with leaders is that they are 9 times out of 10, they are incredible orators. They have the spirit and power about them that can literally wipe the floor clean with anyone listening to them, because they draw you in and they can get you literally to believe whatever they believe in. And I think that is something we need to caution against in this country. There are incredible orators in our country, incredible people who have such power in front of the microphone. And I come back to, but are they the same in private? I do believe accountability lies with our leaders. Full stop. Our leaders are talking to a majority of people in this country who are uneducated, who've been conned, and still fight the effects of what 44 years of an apartheid system of government did to us as a people. Now, Mandela is not the answer. Mandela will never be the answer. But Mandela is an incredible tool we as South Africans have to start addressing and remembering what we actually can achieve if we allow things like to forgive first, like Mandela always said, to know your history, and to empower yourself through education. It's key, it's king. Education is king, because then we'll just keep getting all these things happening. Don't be fooled. Mandela never came out of Robben Island this, dare I use the word, this holy cow that, oh, wow, whatever. Yes, we did see him as a person that could help liberate us. But Mandela himself had to liberate himself first. And he understood that if he did not choose forgiveness, he would have been like someone, like as if he was drinking poison to spite his enemy. He understands the principle of forgiveness, not in a religious point of view, but from a principle point of view of what the dynamics of being human. Mandela was astute in his understanding of what this human condition built in with emotions and psychology and theology and theory and whatever it was. So here was a man in early 90s. He still had to prove to the world that he was a man that could be reckoned with. He was a man that could be negotiated with and used. So how does a single man do that? Remember, he wasn't just fighting the nationalist government. There were people within the African National Congress who were so not superstitious, but suspect of him. Who was this man? Is he going to lead us forward? Is he going to take away the principles of that we fought for, the Freedom Charter and whatever? So Mandela had to prove himself on all corners, not just the oppressor. And he did this. He began to do this in a beautiful way. Now, if you allow me just a minute to share with you one story that I will never forget. You see, in the 90s, Mandela had to show the world that he was a man that he was capable, up for the task of negotiation, peaceful transition to leadership. And he returned to Robben Island and he invited hundreds of former political prisoners to officially close Robben Island as a place of isolation, segregation, and a very, very sad history. Not only dating the political period in our country, but the colonial period, or dating back to when they first landed on Robben Island in 1688. Robben Island has always been a place of isolation and segregation and banishment. And he knew that he had to break that tie. So he invited all these political prisoners and about 300-strong press corps. And he went to the lime quarry. And as I said, this lime quarry is a horrible place, but very bright, very hot. And he picked up a stone and he laid it down. And in similar words, I'm not going to quote him verbatim because I can't recall right now exactly his words, but he said, "Today I choose to forgive. I recognize forgiveness as a part of my journey, because if I do not choose to forgive my enemy, they will hold me captive for the rest of my life." So he understood that liberation was only possible through a sense of forgiveness. And in true Mandela fashion, and I've seen this even working with him over the years, I saw it. Mandela never ever just posed a wonderful statement like that. He always turned it and he pushed it back, whoever was listening, and he would say, he said to that audience gathered, he said, "Right, you all, my fellow comrades, political prisoners, go find your rock and come lay it down with mine. We have a nation to build." And that is a powerful weapon he just picked up, because he never just said it's all going to be about me. It's going to be about us. We have a nation to build. He understood that. Why do you think he created the University of Robben Island in the 70s? It's because he knew that these freedom fighters, these political prisoners held unjustly, were going to be leaders one day. How do you walk out of prison and suddenly take over the reins of a well-functioning country? So that was Mandela's concern. So he said to all the political prisoners, don't come into Robben Island and think you're going to burn your beds and hunger strikes or whatever. No one's going to know. You're 8 kilometers off the coast of Southern Africa. No one's going to know. You empower yourself. You make your statement through education. And that's why through UNISA and the help of Helen Suzman and what, he was encouraging these political prisoners to educate themselves. It's a remarkable story of yes, self-determination, but the story of that, people often say to me, why did it take Mandela so long to die? Physically die. I mean, you know what it was like. Every 2 months, it was like, my word, Mandela's rushed off here. We think, right, I would get a phone call, Matthew, please be prepared to come to Johannesburg, or whatever it was. And for 5 years later, this man was still alive. I believe it took him so long to die because at every point and turn in Mandela's life, he chose life. Whatever it was, he chose life. His body, his mind, his spirit knew to fight. And bless him now that struggle is over. But I truly believe that he held on right to the end. And again, it's that power of that human spirit. So there's a very long answer to your question.
No, that's a wonderful answer, very enlightening. I always try, there's 2 points that I want to elaborate on myself here. The first point is, selfishly, the reason why I do this podcast to a large extent is to try and empower myself through knowledge, through learning about other people's experiences, insights, and so on. And I always think to myself, okay, so this guest is telling me a story. How can I apply it to my life? And in doing so, hopefully the listeners will then go through that same practice with me. But I think it's very important, that concept of liberating yourself, attending to your house first, before you decide to go and become a crusader for another cause, or a keyboard warrior, for example. In 2024, it's especially prevalent. Get your house in order first. Organize yourself. Liberate yourself from your demons, from the injustices that you've had to endure as an individual. And once you can free yourself and liberate yourself from your own personal experiences, demons, etc., you can then become a light or a vessel. As Mandela was so often, I got the impression that he was a vessel. He didn't see himself as, I'm Nelson Mandela doing this and doing that. He saw himself as being a vessel for a force of greater good. And I believe that in some respects, everybody's got that aspect. In fact, I know that everybody has elements of that to their character, that we can all be vessels and forces for good if we confront what's in our room first, come to terms with that, and then we can move on. That was my first point. My second point is, I think, especially in 2024 with social media and misinformation, it's important to always come at something with a context of genuine curiosity. And I think that's very valid, and I'd love for you to fact check me on this when I'm done. But especially in South Africa, with the diversity that we've got, to inquire and to engage with people on a level of genuine curiosity, not from a level which perhaps in the past was done from inferiority and superiority. I'm genuinely acknowledging my biases, my predispositions to think a certain way, and I'm welcoming you to the table to please share with me yours, so that together we can collaborate and we can perhaps challenge each other's perspectives and then walk away from that table as better people. Would you say that would be a constructive way to go about things?
It's a no-brainer. I think I concur with everything that you said. I just, in every fray, in every circumstance, we are people with egos. And I think if you do genuinely want to follow that path, which you said, I think you would perhaps just need to add in, fact check your ego, particularly men. I find they're the hardest ones to crack when talking about this, to break generational ties, to remove yourself from implicit bias. I mean, these are all the things you've said and many more words. But yeah, I agree with you. None of us can do great things. We can all do small things with great love. And that's not my words, that's Mother Teresa's. But what I'm sharing with you is through your podcast, let's say you do podcasts for 10 years, let's say you do it for 1 year. They are forever in the ether. They are forever there. And one day you will pass into the ether and I will pass. But these podcasts will still survive. I just think because of social media and because of this instant gratification, this world that particularly young adults are growing up into, that we tend to forget that it's hard, that you've got to strive for something. It might not happen now, it might not happen in 20 years, but it will happen, if you're prepared to fight for it. And my greatest blessing to me, my greatest gift to me has been this longevity of this journey, that I was constantly renewing myself and learning and just understanding that I'm not going to get it in one day. I'll give you a little example. So I was sitting with Bishop Tutu the one day, and here I was, this great man, this very exuberant, the Bishop Tutu we all know. And there's a man who's highly criticized. The Nationalist Party didn't like him. At one stage, the ANC didn't like him in the last 10 years and whatnot. And here was this man who never lost track of his vision. And people say, no, it's because he was a priest. No. He said to me the one day something I won't forget. And I said to him, look, I'm just Matthew Willman from Pinetown, and, I have my struggles. How the hell did you keep going when, the world was against you? And he was amazing. He sat back, and he's a little guy, and he sat back in his chair and he put his hands on his chest and he looked at me and he said, Matthew, one of my greatest weaknesses is that I love to be loved, and to have been vilified as a matter of cause was excruciatingly painful. I had to learn to build the skin of a rhinoceros. And I never forget, he had that finger with the rhinoceros and the way he said it. And it was as if he opened up a wonderful insight into the strongest people aren't the greatest people. The weakest people who believe in love and things that are of the human nature are the strongest people. I've met people who live in rubbish dumps, who've never left a rubbish dump, who have never left the confines of New York City, or has never met a white person before. That was I did that in Eritrea and in North Sudan. People who've lived these lives. And I'm just fascinated that it comes down to very simple principles. And I think Mandela can be exalted for that. Just don't compare Mandela to today's issues. And I think therein lies a big problem, because very often Mandela gets criticized. He created this and this and that. But no, he did more than the average man, I can tell you that. He helped build a constitution, which is idealistic in its nature. But if it wasn't for that constitution, our Justice Department, our revenue facilities, SARS, would have been captured. We were that close. And I know that because my sister's in the Justice Department. So what I'm saying is Mandela did his bit. He did his thing. It's up to us now, and our leaders to uphold and celebrate and remember and do more. Mandela said to us in 2006, he said, it's in your hands now. It's in your hands. He understood. My day's done. I've done as best I could. It's your reins. Yeah. So we got into a bit of trouble for that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I remember he signed off one of his famous quotes. I watched it on TV, and he had that glorious Mandela smile with it. Almost his eyes got small, and he had this little grin. Yeah. And he said, in other words, don't call me, I'll call you.
And he used it often. He would go into the auditorium at the Mandela Foundation, and he would often say, because he retired from retirement, and he would say, don't call me. I was there when he said that. And then I often remember that smile you talk about. He was sitting in his office or in his lounge, and a guest would come in, and this big grin would come on his face. And Grasha, his third wife, who I obviously worked with and knew very well, she leant over my shoulder, and she wanted Madiba to smile, but she knew that when he really smiled, those eyes were just little slits. And she just says, "Oh, Madiba, don't give me those Chinese eyes." And she was leaning right over my shoulder, and he would burst out laughing. But one thing I loved about Madiba is he was a great studier of people. One of the worst situations I ever had with him, literally, I'm being genuine, I can laugh about it now, but it was horrific. Very often I would be in his office or in his lounge, and Zelda or a bodyguard would have to leave the room. So it's just me and Mandela in the room, which is very rare. I mean, it's also very dangerous. I mean, whatever, you're never left alone with him. And when Mandela is alone, he won't just sort of look at his fingernails or something. I've got this picture, and I felt naughty taking it. He's folded his legs, he straightened his shirt, those beautiful Madiba shirts, and he folded his arms on his legs, and he then proceeded to stare at me. That's all he did. He stared at me. I got up, I moved to the left, the eyes would move. I would sit down at the other chair, he would sit and stare. He was observing me. It's so intimidating. You have no idea how intimidating it is. But you're thinking, oh my word, is there something wrong with me? Am I failing Madiba? Is he thinking bad things? But whatever. And I realized he wasn't. He was just so passionate and he loved people. Mandela was an observer of people. And I think maybe prison life does that to you. I don't know. But I've often watched him in a crowd. You know, sometimes he didn't have his hearing aids in or whatever, but he would just do the same thing, fold his legs. Even in his office or in his room, when he had like 5 or 6 people gathered, milling around, you know, all wanting to shake his hand, he would fold his legs and he would stare at people. And I love that. He would just stare. And, you know, usually now, if you like stare at somebody, you cast your eye away because you think, oh my word, what's that person thinking? No, not Mandela. He would stare at you and then he would stare at you some more. And so the one day I thought, no, I can't handle this anymore. I have to strike up a conversation. So I said, Mr. Mandela, I used to call him Mkulu. I said, Mkulu, you're the great Nelson Mandela. And he's like, oh, you know, he would sit back. And I said, but Madiba, you've done everything our country can ask of you. I'm just a middle-class white boy from Pinetown. I don't even think he knew where Pinetown was. But I said to him, what can I do to make a difference? Now, this is 2010, okay, Soccer World Cup year. And I'll never, ever forget his answer. Literally, I've written it on the back of my books, actually. He leant back. Now, Mandela loved questions like that. He never assumed answers for every question he got asked. He often said, oh, go speak to Bill Gates about that or go speak to that person. He would delegate. But when there was something that he could answer, wow, he loved that. And he sat back, he looked at me, and he said, you know, I'm not going to do his accent because I can't. He said, if you want to be relevant, you must serve. And it was like, I was 28 at the time. It was like a light bulb or a fog lifted. Something changed in me because I saw how right he was. So very often in our life and the challenges we face in business and home communities or wherever, or family, that you want recognition and your ego goes through the roof because it's my way or the highway. And I realized that one of your greatest therapies and your greatest ability to help yourself through challenges is through service. And Mandela saw that.
Yeah.
And I often think, if you want to be relevant, take the word relevant out. If you want to be loved, serve. Serve your place of work, your place of entertainment, your place of family, place of worship, your home. It's endless. Just serve. And you get blessed back. And I think we forget that in this world of instant gratification. And look, I'm not sitting here trying to say I've got all answers, but one of the truths that I'm able to give is that I use inferences from out my experiences with these leaders. And I say, right, here's a man who told me this. He said this. I mark it against his life or her life. And I say, well, actually, you know what? There's an ounce of truth in that, or a large bucket load of truth in that. And that's what I enjoy, is because not only do I speak with these stories, but I'm a photographer. I have the images to back up what I'm sharing. So it's a lovely way to see the world, I think, through these words of these well-known people.
I think so, Matthew. And to your point on service, I think that going back right to the very beginning when we spoke about the human condition, I think religion is something that is cast across all the far-reaching corners of the earth and varying religions to different people. But one of the fundamental pillars of religion is to be of service and to serve. And I think that you could argue that that is also then is part of the human condition, is to serve and to be of service. And you've done so in a way that is creative in context with your skills in your documentary photography. And to some extent, I find myself in a similar position with the podcast, is trying to serve in some way, affect one person positively. So my goal for every episode is if I can challenge one person's thought process or better their way of how they approach their life or how they view themselves or how they view others in a positive way, then I've done my job with respect to the podcast. And you could take it a step further. I've got a 4-month-old baby boy, our first child. One day he might want to listen to these conversations, that it might be in the year 2050 or 2060. And he could listen to what Dad was saying when he was 34 years old and the types of conversations that he was having. And in some respects, that's also very getting philosophical now, but religious, because it's infinite then at that point. Speaking about photography, and you alluded to that picture earlier. There was one picture in particular that stood out to me in your book. I've got it on the top right-hand side here, or on my right-hand side. We called him Madiba, your photo essay. And there was a photo in that book of his chair, and his presidential chair. And that spoke to me. I'm not quite sure why, but it did. And I think that's the magic of art, is sometimes you don't know, you can't put your finger on it just yet, but maybe I'll figure it out in a year or two's time. But I just know that it made me feel something, right? And there's an authority and a wisdom about that chair and about the way that you portrayed that chair in that picture. And it's almost like I get the feeling that chair is like the custodian of Mzansi. The decisions that must have been made and the confrontations and the conflict, the internal conflict or decisions that were presented and discussed in and around that room and where that chair was. My question to you is, if you could put that chair anywhere in the country as a reminder, as a symbol, as a beacon, where would you place it?
Lovely question. I'm going to answer it in two ways. The first one, I need to give context to how I shot that chair. So I was living in the house in Nkunu, where Mandela is buried today, down in the Eastern Cape, former Transkei. And Mandela moved there for about 4 years. And so I was commuting down there to photograph various things. And I had he had this house, a replica of his house from Victor Verster prison he had made, the initial house there. And I walked past his room and I saw this desk and this chair. And I asked his eldest grandson, Mandla Sizwe Dalibunga Zweli Velile Mandela, who's now the chief of Mvezu and an MP in Parliament. He said, no, that was where Mandela made all his decisions. I said, what? And I said, no, that's his presidential chair. I was like, what? So I just said, may I do a photo shoot with it? And he says, yes, just look after it. I'll get one of the police officers, the security detail, to assist you. Little did he know is that I picked up that chair and I walked 400 meters into the Platteland, into the homestead. Mandela owns about 50 acres of land there. And I took this chair on the shoulder, blimmin' heavy. It was an old Buckhouse Brothers chair. And we put it out in the fields, and I just took this picture, and then some rural children were running through the lands, and I said, hey, I whistled to come, let's do a shoot, and I did a whole shoot. So that's how I took that picture. And for me, like you share, the symbolism of it is very powerful. For me, it's the symbol of what you can achieve. Here I was a rural boy, grew up from 1918 and in Mvezu, moved to Nkunu, then to Mbegizweni, and then down to, where he studied down in Fort Hare and all the rest of it, and Idutwa. And he left on a train, stole away at night, and ended up in a mining colliery up in Johannesburg. And then he grew from there. He became a lawyer, and eventually, 44 years later, he became the president of our country. And that for me is blows my mind, that this rural person can come up from such humble beginnings and sit at the highest seat of the land. So that's what my message in that image is, and I certainly will send it to you. But the second part of your question is, where would I put that chair today? Now, I'll break that into two answers. If I want to prove a point to our politicians, I would put it right in front of Parliament, literally in the atrium, that they have to walk past it, okay? That's the one thing. And then secondly, for us as the common man and woman, I certainly would travel it. I would travel it. I would obviously protect it, but I would travel it because can you imagine the inspiration a chair like that would have been seen in the middle of Durban, in the middle of Vryheid, in the middle of the Battle of Blood River, in Madiba Center in Johannesburg, or in the middle of Cape Town. You know what I'm saying? Or in a community, Khayelitsha, Ilanga, Ngletu, Soweto. I think something like that would just resonate with people. It would have such a message on that. So there's my answer. I would travel it. I would just have it out there. Yeah.
What a wonderful answer. I didn't see it going that way, but that's the beauty of these interviews. Fantastic. Matthew, This is, unbelievable. It's been a journey that I've been on for a week. Often I say to people, I've really enjoyed the last hour, but my preparation for this interview, I've really gone on a journey over the last week, and then even in our comms off air. So thank you once again, but I'd love for you to share where people can find you, and of course, what work you have upcoming. Is there anything you're excited about in the not too distant future?
Yeah. Thank you, Clinton. Thank you for this opportunity. I speak to a lot of people, but never do I. I've spoken a lot with you over this last week. I think we've both challenged each other on the approach to such an interview around such a hot topic like Nelson Mandela in this current time in our country. So yeah, thank you for letting people know. I have Instagram handles, just Matthew_Willman_ dance, or just Matthew_Willman. You'll find me. Just Google Instagram, my name there. I have two websites. Perhaps the one most are interested in is the first one, matthewwillman.co.za. It's just got a beautiful collection of my works, not only politically and documentary, but also in my dance work and my creative work. You'll see my Mandela work there as well. And then I'm a master handprint analog photographer. So I have my darkroom, and I have a separate website called the Willman Collection, which is really, really rare pictures that I've photographed on film over the last 26 years, which I have up on that website. So I leave in 2 weeks' time. I'm going to launch an exhibition at Parliament in Union House on the 22nd.
Can you get hold of that chair?
Oh my word, can you imagine? It's sitting in Nkunu still, so I don't know if I'll get it by then. But yeah, I have a beautiful exhibition on being South African. It's with the Spear Arts Trust, Foundation Trust. As I said, it's a partnership between my Arts Trust and them. So it's about 8 of my Mandela works, the Freedom Charter, which I discovered, Mandela's Rivonia trial notes, some superb works, and the original Amandla Fist. I was the photographer who did the original portrait study of Mandela's iconic Amandla Fist. So that's going to be on display. It spends its life traveling around the world, but it's back in South Africa for a little bit. And then, I'm back in the Karoo. I'm working on a big documentary collection of work in the Karoo. And then I head to Lesotho, and then I head off to Zambia. I've got work, development work up there, and then a big exhibition in Zambia. And then, who knows? That's where it's at. I'm a bit of a traveling Wilbury with my life.
Wonderful. Very exciting. Matthew, once again, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time.
Lovely, Clinton. Take care. Thanks, guys. Enjoy.
Not so fast. It's a new year, which means it's a new outro. And let me level with you. It is such a cool feeling when I see that Spotify subscribers number increase on the weekly, when I see the number of people listening to the episodes going up. And it really makes a huge difference. Have you ever done something and you feel so good when you get rewarded by some positive feedback and you really feel like you're making a difference? That's what it means to me, and that's how I feel. And it goes a long way. If you like the show, share it and subscribe it. Thank you humbly, and I'll see you next week.